assignment. I hope those faculty will stand up and relate their experience as far as what their expectations were and what the outcomes of those were. Now, this is with the understanding that projects and assignments within the course are different than full electives. But there are a lot of very similarities between them. So that's why we put this here to kind of provide a nucleus for what we think we might want the outcomes from these electives to be. Okay, so do we have everybody back? All right, so as I said, this next section is really going to be faculty discussion, so use your outside voices, and we're going to be talking about course outcomes, what we want to have come from these courses, what do we want these courses to accomplish. And we're going to look at the essential components of some of these evidence resources that we've selected as potential electives. And these evidence resources or species will be the critical appraisal summaries, critical appraisals, or critical appraisal tables. They're slightly different, but they use the same, basically the same methodology in critical thinking. Best evidence tables, and that was the January workshop last year. Case reports and case studies. We had our fall OWL series on case reports and case studies. The independent research study, which really is probably the most flexible elective that we could develop, and we'll probably be flexing it, redeveloping it, refining it as we find opportunities to have students help us in our own research or EVP activities, or we have students who possibly come up and say, gee, I'd like to work on this particular project with you. And then letters to the editor. And letters to the editor are really kind of a unique and up-and-coming evidence resource. They've moved from the realm of opinion pieces because of the requirements of a lot of journals to have any of the letters to the editor, which are often in response to published articles, a response coming from a different perspective, or adding a different aspect of a publication. So, and the requirement is that it be more than just your opinion, more than just your perspective from your expertise, but you also incorporate other evidence that maybe the original authors haven't incorporated. Mm-hmm. And so it's really a different animal than it might have been 10 or 15 years ago. So that's a really interesting development as far as using research or using evidence. So why these particular electives, and are we limited? We're not limited to only these electives, but these electives or the species really uses knowledge, skills, behaviors, and attitudes that we've been trying to really make an integral part of the national education. And many of you faculty have incorporated skill building activities or role modeling in your courses already. So evidence-based practice skills, knowledge, behaviors, and attitudes are really integrated very well into the curriculum. And now could be a good time to really pull all these skills forward so that they go from just skills being used in education to knowledge generating activities and professional activities really used in practice. And so there are transitions that we need to address as we go that way. So these different types of electives also represent various levels of intricacy, of sophistication, of critical thinking, of effort. And so that's why we've chosen them to kind of represent the spectrum of what our students could do but they also represent the spectrum of what our faculty currently do as role models. And all the research, all the educational research regarding teaching evidence-based practice or expecting competencies of evidence-based healthcare practitioners really show that the best way that the students change their behaviors and their attitudes and really translate that knowledge and those skills to applied skills in practice is because the faculty are role models. That is the biggest influence that really pushes the competencies of students in any of the healthcare professions, dentistry, nursing, allopathic medicine, in all the Centers for Evidence-Based Medicine in the UK, which have been leaders in incorporating evidence-based practice skills. So it's that knowledge generation from faculty role models. We just talked about in Dr. Johnson's about generating new knowledge and how do you incorporate it into, do you incorporate it into a class or do you incorporate it into an elective? Well, these electives really can be that knowledge generator, which then can be moved into the general curriculum. So knowledge generated, but also knowledge translated into practice and applied. So I just wanted to remind everybody of the 5 essential skills, the A team, for real-time evidence-based practice. It's being able to ask a focused, searchable clinical question, being able to access the medical literature, performing a structured search that's logical and comprehensive, and then understanding the available resources and databases. Appraising the literature, which is really a critical step, critically evaluating the evidence. We're looking for quality, for robustness, reliability, and validity. Then the next step, again, is very essential, especially for healthcare providers, going from paper to actually practice, applying that evidence. So utilizing the research, translating the knowledge, and applying the evidence. And then finally, making a full circle and feeding right back into the loop is assessing the outcome of using or not using particular evidence information and assessing the impact on practice in the profession. So I know those are all ingrained in most of your psyches, but there's always the opportunity to review those. So what do we want to accomplish with these electives? Well, the main thing, because we are an educational institution, is student learning. And as I said, using research utilization, translating that knowledge, and then critical thinking skills so that it can be applied to practice. Could we have publishable outcomes? If a student is working on a BET or a group of students are working on best evidence table, could we expect it to be publishable or of publishable quality? Or can they do pieces and parts and maybe several student groups work over a series of trimesters or electives? Again, because we're looking at the time and the effort required, how the students can fit it in, but also how faculty, mentors, and instructors can fit it into their schedule as far as time. So we want them to be useful for education, but we also want to make it very applicable and practical, applied in practice, and recognizing that it is a scholarly accomplishment. And that might be a motivating factor for a lot of students, and certainly a lot of faculty. So what should the outcomes be? Should they be the whole puzzle, part of the puzzle, individual, or group projects, part of a course, or separate electives? Well, those are some of the things that we can discuss today, and Bob Scheel and Fraser are going to engage you in those discussions. But if we look specifically at the different types, And here I hope that maybe Mabel and Geraldine will jump in, or anybody who does do. I think Dan was having students critically appraise literature in his class. But the critical appraisal summary is a classic short piece of narrative text that will look at either a particular, maybe a landmark article or a series of articles. Very similar in format and expectations to a case report. So that's a critical appraisal summary. And so they're traditional. They've been around for forever. But a more useful in clinical practice is the critically appraised topic or the critical appraisal table. The topic is multiple papers, and a table is often focused on one particular paper. They're done in a table format, targeted keywords that are often searchable by a database, phrases. The biggest thing with a CAP is that healthcare providers in practice find them very easy to skim. So you're not having to sit down and read through things and hope that you're getting the full impact. They're very simple that way, but of course we know that using the right keywords and getting the phrases, short words, just so that you're conveying the right information can be very difficult. So that is a real skill that a lot of students learn, you know, when they do something like a critical appraisal table. One of the assets or one of the resources that people rely on are the critical appraisal checklists. And I have put them in the handouts. I sent them to some of the people who registered early by the webinar. Those who registered just this morning, got the link, didn't get it, but I will send them to you. But they're also posted in the Faculty Development Workshop, Developing Evidence for CAM, and in the Signet course that's available to students, which is EVP at NUHS. So it's an open Signet course. So actually doing a critical appraisal table, the students, in my experience, have found these checklists to be very helpful because it provides prompts. Any faculty who have students doing critical appraisals and using checklists, do you have any, Geraldine?
We use the Hainline checklist because that's the text that is required for the students to use. And so the checklists are located in the back of the book, and the chapters describe and explain what does each question mean.
Yep. And so the ones that I printed off are actually from the Centers for Evidence-Based Medicine. But if you put them side by side, you'll see that they're really exactly the same questions and the same characteristics that are targeted. One of the things that Hainline makes very easy is that he has instead of having to fill in the answer or put in phrases, there's selections. Is it yes, no, or maybe not evidence or something like that? Yeah. So it's very useful for real-time assessment of an article or appraisal of an article, whether you can use it. And there's some extra questions there that are specifically targeted toward practice, whether it can be used in practice. And the Centers for Evidence-Based Medicine checklists are fillable forms, and we have them posted. So they really assist the students in making a critical appraisal table. So Geraldine uses them, the Hainline ones, because they're good for class discussion, for students being able to, in real time, appraise an article, which is one of the reasons why Hainline developed them. And then the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, they're more of that knowledge generation type. So you can fill in the forms, and then the forms can be, they're searchable for particular questions or particular keywords. Anybody else have any feedback about doing critical appraisals?
I use a combination of the first two in my course for our EVP assignment, and I find that the paper is easier somehow for the students to do. And I tried the CAP and utilizing multiple papers and multiple topics, but I found I had to limit it.
Yeah.
And it was just too much. It was all too confusing. So I found that the simpler the better. But I think the CAP probably would be more appropriate than than the combination of things that I do now in my course. So it can get so confusing to the students that they are completely wrong in organization of the paper.
Right. And that's one of the things that is pointed out in a lot of the educational, that when a student is doing a critical appraisal, not only are they learning the skills and following the checklist or answering the questions, but then they have to get it in the right writing form.
Yes.
You know, and
it seems harder and harder to get them to do that.
Yeah. So that's where I really think a lot of the faculty effort goes into is assisting that writing process. Absolutely. The nice thing about critical appraisals and CAPs, not only are they useful in the classroom, either as a discussion or as an assignment where it's written, it does require a lot of work on the faculty end, but they're also publishable in journals. There are many journals, the American Academy of Pediatrics and Family Practice, the Journal of Family Practice, I think it is, both publish on a monthly basis, a couple of critical appraisal summaries that look like a case study or case report, limited like 1,500 words, which is really difficult, as well as skimmable tables. You can go in the back and you can skim through the tables, and they kind of highlight some of the key articles that have been published either in those journals or in other journals on those topics. So that's always a very good thing to do, because you're keeping up with the literature as a professional, and you're teaching these things to your students, often with current literature, and being able to publish it in one of the journals can be very important and a real capstone type of project. Critical appraisal, the tables and the summaries are also key in many of the online databases, such as Natural Standard, AHRQ, which is really the website, but they have a database of critically appraised topics. And the Centers for Evidence-Based Medicine, especially the Oxford site, has actually a CAT generator that you can download and you can fill in those checklists that we have in the handouts. But it will actually ask the questions kind of like an online survey almost, and then the students can fill it in, you press submit, and you get it all in a nice format. So other critical appraisal formats are journal club presentations. And for instance, the grand rounds require critical appraisal skills. They're in a presentation format. And so when you're assessing those or evaluating those projects, you not only have the writing or the critical appraisal skills, but you also have presentation skills. Are the students getting the right message across, and can they elicit a discussion? So it's the next step or a different step in classroom activities or as standalone courses. Best evidence tables, and this was the topic of the winter workshop last time. You can find the whole database, which is searchable and selectable, at bestbets.org, not bestbets.com. You can place a lot of very good bets there, I'm sure. you do have to acknowledge that you know where the nearest Gamblers Anonymous is. Bestbets.org. You can actually use those best evidence tables, but you can also contribute best evidence tables. So it's considered a publishable or a published accomplishment. Your submissions are peer reviewed by the Best Bet organization. which is Center for Evidence-Based Medicine at Manchester in the UK. And they encouraged people. They started focusing on emergency medicine and expanded to orthopedics. Then some of the nursing professions got involved because they felt that they weren't quite usable by, you know, the first responders, which, you know, are often nurses who meet you at the ER door. So that's a great outlet for a lot of the efforts that we might want to take. It's a real standard format because they felt that as professionals, when you need to use things in real time, you need to be familiar with the format. And people generating these things should follow a specific format. So again, that's a skill that students need to learn. They start with a 3-part PICO question. We always talk about the 4-part: population, intervention, comparison, and outcome. They will allow you not to have a comparison because very often in emergency medicine, you don't really care what the comparison is. You are looking particularly for a particular outcome for a particular patient. So they'll accept a 3-part question. And one of the things in the training that is online for the best bets is they say that clinical question is a clincher. It's one of the most difficult things to get the students and the interns and the residents who are required to generate these to do and to ask correctly. One of the things with the best bets, the reason it was started was for being usable in practice, right in the emergency room. So it's set up like a database, and it can be accessed from any computer. They're also published hard copy and electronically in several journals, starting with the Journal of Emergency Medicine. But I think there's 7 or 8 journals now who will carry that format of the best evidence table. So I put the BET format, the checklists that are used in this handout, and they're also online. There's a template in Signet, and there's various handouts to support how to do them. So we had students do them actually in Tri-5 and EBP1 as sort of a culminating project for the course because it really incorporates all those 5 skills. But then to get feedback from their peers, we also had them present their best evidence, so do a quick oral presentation of their bets. And the students really did a good job. They did struggle, like Dan said, because it was EBP1 and many of them were just relearning or learning for the first time the skills of asking the right question. So we spent a lot of time in class kind of asking a question as a proposal. Propose it first. Then we'll do a search on it. Then refine your search. So it was really a whole semester project for that course. So it did take a lot of effort. They did do a good job because they were pretty serious about it. Once they realized that it wasn't just going to be me looking at it, but everybody in the class was going to know. That just added another factor, I think, on to them doing a really good job because they wanted, it was very important for them to do a good job in front of their peers. Whereas I think sometimes for the professor, when it comes down to the end of the semester, they're going to do exactly what's required. So it might have been very high quality, but not of publishable quality. Or there might have been more mistakes than they would do if they didn't have to present it. So also in, well, I didn't put them in the handout, but I made copies of some of the scoring rubrics that we've used for journal clubs and for the best bets for the presentation. And these are also on the Harvard MIT Health Sciences teaching and learning labs, as well as in the Centers for Evidence-Based Medicine. So using the rubrics and getting them to the students ahead of time and saying, this is how you're going to be evaluated, really helped them formulate in their mind, okay, now I see how I have to do this. And in the best specs, that's one of the things that they said too, that once their students really understood the format, it made the whole process a lot easier for them. Has anybody else done vets in class and have experience in expectations?
Yeah, I tried it in the Tri-7 clinical nutrition class, and this was last January, right after we had that meeting, and that was the first that I've heard of the table, so they were pretty brand new to me. And I tried to make it as foolproof as possible, that's for dummies, and it didn't go over all that well, to be honest with you. You know, the students are going to do the minimal amount of work possible to get through it. And I had it done, I had it set up as a cumulative project where group 1 would do the first part of the table, group 2 would do the second, and it would build upon the previous group's work. If the previous group's work wasn't sufficient, then the next group couldn't build upon it. So I would definitely have set it up differently if I continued to do that, but I couldn't teach the class because of conflicts and stuff. But it was a learning experience. It was not anywhere near publishable quality, but I think it was new for me and it was new for them, so that was kind of expected. But I think they're extremely valuable though for learning tools.
Yeah. You know, there's the aspect of doing a vet for the process of learning, you know, and of doing a vet for knowledge generation and utilization. Yeah, there's a real wide spectrum there. Yes.
I think Ryan's point emphasizes to me that I think these podcasts are ideal for electives because it allows you to work with a smaller group of students that have chosen to do it, and then you can devote the time to help them grow in that way. And try to force it on a mass, a larger scale. I think this might be a good solution to.
Has anybody else done vets?
Yeah, I told what they're saying, so I want to talk about my segment is how do you get students to actually think about each of those pieces and do something with them.
Yeah.
I've been doing it for the last year. I've been asking aspects of it right with that hours.
Yeah.
So, you know, kind of off topic from what their focus is, but it's interesting the range of results.
Yeah.
Not only does students either work alone or work with others, and they can pick their own topics.
Okay, so we'll get more into that in your presentation too. Okay, so as I said, publishing the vet, they have to be very high quality. The aspect that really makes the vets work are very similar actually to case studies, that they address a common clinical problem or alternatively a rare clinical problem or a controversial topic. Sometimes it's generating new evidence from classic literature, which is very legitimate and very useful sometimes, or new literature, new topics that are out. Sometimes the evidence is because it is contrary to current practice, and that's where it makes a big impact. They also focus on evidence that's likely to therefore change common practice or current practice. And one of the things that we found in the journal club, again, a critical appraisal and a discussion, is that I think it was 71% or maybe 74% of the interns actually used the information that was presented in journal club or they presented to change or support decisions. So 98% of what was presented in journal club was actually used in practice downstairs in the clinic. and 70% or more used it to change what they had intended to do. So that's really important, and that's really what a vet does too, and it documents that, and then it allows the next generation of the users to therefore use it. We move on to the case study, and here, as we know, Dr. Cameron had several OWLs this fall on case studies, but as we know, it's a detailed description of a single case. It documents rare events, early trends, things that are unusual, something about that patient, that case, which strikes you as unique or necessary to communicate to others. Requires a very detailed, well-defined patient description. Dr. Johnson gave some excellent information and requirements of a case study in his past OWL that he just did, and highlighting how highly detailed and methodologically sophisticated case studies are. They're limited in length, 1,500, 2,000 words. So again, it's very difficult to get that type of information into that format. So not only do you have to have the skills and the observation, the methods and that kind of stuff, but you do have to have writing skills. So again, perfect type of advanced course. And as far as an elective goes, could it be that you have interns, for instance, that, as Dr. Johnson pointed out, who would like to help you? They could take a case study elective and maybe help you with the literature search, which can be very, very involved. When you finally look at the 1,500 or 2,000 words and you think, boy, I did a lot of work getting the background and establishing the basis for that. But there are pieces and parts of a case study or a case report that students could do. But you also might have some really interested, very motivated students who really desire to do it on their own, as and do the whole thing. They're rich sources of ideas and hypotheses. There's a real need for case studies from the CAM perspective. And that's one of the things that really is the basis of your case report, is that perspective, what makes it unique. So in many cases, you can partner with someone who is not a clinical practitioner, because they will have the methods, the ability to help you with analysis, with the literature review, and that kind of thing. They often start with observations. They utilize the essential EVP skills, asking a question, accessing the literature, then describing, analyzing, and putting it all into a communicated form. You can use them to decide whether, okay, I can go from this unique event, can I apply it to other patients? It's not generalizable the way a randomized controlled trial is, but using your expertise and the patient values, two of the key aspects of evidence-based practice, can you take that evidence and can you apply it? That requires critical thinking. And then also the assessment part, assessing the impact on your practice, on the intern's practice. Geraldine, Dr. Cameron actually teaches a case study course. And really, as it should be, it's a post-grad course because of the requirements and the effort that really goes into a case study. But maybe you can add some perspectives on what's expected in a case study course, and how might it be different for a student or for an intern?
I actually teach two different courses on how to write case reports. One is with the Masters in Advanced Clinical Practice. So if anybody is interested in going through that program, I'm happy to talk to you about the course requirements. You have to write 2 case reports during the 2 years of education. But there's also a postgrad, a 1-day postgrad course that I teach on how to write case reports. And so if you want to teach that as an elective course to students, I would strongly suggest that you do it yourself first and go through the whole publication process before you start teaching it. I know I see a lot of people in here that have gone through the master's program who definitely could start teaching right now how to write a case report and having students help them with writing case reports. But if you're a novice and haven't done it before, it might be better to go through and try it yourself first. It's not as easy as it seems. You read these case reports and they're real straightforward and they're real short and you think, oh, that's simple, I can do that. But they're actually not as easy as one would think.
Yeah, well, Gerald, that supports what I said about having the credentials to teach the course.
Yep.
And you can't teach that case study course if you haven't submitted a case report.
Right.
Whether it was accepted or not.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of intricacies that you don't necessarily see in those few pages in the journal that are very important to include, but also it's also that mentoring. When you're working with students, when you're instructing students and they're learning the skills at the same time, and they're really relying on your expertise.
And I should say that I'm not trying to deter working with students. I'm just saying if you want to be the teacher of a class, you really should have submitted one. But if there's clinicians who want students to help them do their literature search for a case report or help them write different sections, I think it's totally appropriate as a clinician-intern relationship. But if you're trying to be the instructor of an elective, I think that it makes sense to submit it and even have a few published.
Yeah. Now, I have to tell you that just in this past semester, I get a lot of the interns coming up when they're working on their journal clubs. Can I help them with the TICO question, or can I help them with the search? And then they get going, and then they do a really good job. In addition to that, I had 6 students come and ask about doing a case study. They were interested in possibly using that independent research study elective, which is kind of an open elective that we have at National. But they wanted to work with Dr. Anderson, Dr. Ranke, Dr. Jurek, and Dr. Iannelli. They were your interns who came up asking about that. They had stumbled on a topic or a patient, and they were wondering, about this. So I end up usually helping them with, okay, what is the clinical question? What's the unique aspect? Tell me about your patient. Let's see what the literature says. And that's kind of one of the clinchers is, oh, I didn't realize that there was so much on it, and maybe this really isn't a unique thing, or there really isn't anything from the perspective that the students are really engaging. So there is interest. In addition to the DC clinicians, we had 2 gung-ho ND students who are still interested in doing a case report, and they're probably working with you guys on that right now, because they come up periodically and they ask questions and then go away and do their thing and then come back up again. So there really is interest from the student standpoint. Most of them really want to do one, then end up saying, wow, this is really going to take a lot of work. I'd like to help my clinician do one. How can we do that? So that's why, they might have said, Dr. Sullivan told me to go talk to you, because that's what I usually do. Go talk to your clinicians, and if you're really interested in this and you really have something, they would, you guys are all experienced enough in writing them that you can mentor them. So it might be a good opportunity to kind of have an established course so that they could get credit for it, or for the independent research study for the research assistants who have gone through the mentored research program at UIC. The university has given, when they've been acting as research assistants, they've been given a tuition waiver to complete their project. So that might be helpful. They don't need an elective, why am I going to pay for it? but you're acting as a research assistant, can we work up a tuition waiver? So there's really not a cost for your extra effort. So those are possibilities of getting students engaged in these kind of courses, especially when they're not required. And then we come to the independent research study. And mainly what I've used that for has been the mentored research students, participants who have been at UIC, and each one has really been unique, depending on what they're doing at UIC and what they're going to come back for. But one thing that consistently that we've used this course for is when the students actually go to write up something about their mentored research experience. So each one of them, we've had 7 posters that have been written and presented and 2 platform presentations. And the students have used this course to kind of give them the structure for doing a poster or for writing that presentation. And so we have some of the resources that those students have used kind of organized them to that as well. But truly, the independent research study, if you look at the classic, way that of the research process, where you're identifying the problem, you're observing it, you're describing it, you're constructing your hypothesis, you're testing the hypothesis, you're looking at the background, you're experimenting, repeating it, verifying it, then rebuilding your hypothesis. That's really the background of the applied EBP skills of asking, access, analyzing, evaluating, appraising, and assessing. So it's very diverse, it's very involved. Dr. Appleyard and I were talking about the independent research study as an elective, and that was one of the aspects that he brought. Is it going to be something like a PhD thesis? Is it a capstone project? Is it part of, a faculty member research project where they bring someone on as a research assistant? What would that elective look like, and what would it be? And I think the answer is that it will probably be a very flexible, encompassing type of project, and maybe taught one-on-one, or taught, maybe mentored is a better word, as using students as research assistants. On the other hand, now that we have the DCMPH coordinated program, could we use this elective to mentor the capstone projects? So our students who are going through the MPH program at UIC can do their capstone projects here with our faculty and our clinicians, or their field work with our using the structure of an independent research study. So that's an opportunity for both students and faculty. And then finally, but not least, last but not least, are the letters to an editor. And this is an elective or an area that's near and dear to Dr. Kramer's heart. He's published some interesting letters to the editor. And the things to note about that is really important is that the letters to the editor are peer-reviewed pieces of literature, especially when they're indexed in databases like EBSCOhost and PubMed. So if you write it to the journal, it's selected to be published in the journal. It will be indexed in PubMed just as those articles are. So they're very specific requirements for letters to the editor, not just to be a very emotional or opinionated piece, but to be evidence-based responses to the literature. They're current, they're relevant. They do take a lot of effort in that you really have to be able to critically appraise the article that you're responding to, but you can incorporate the CAM perspective that is often missing from a lot of the articles, especially when they're not written by a CAM healthcare provider or a CAM scientist that's interested in CAM. requires critical thinking. The other thing is it really sanctions the publication or the communication of alternative perspectives. So you might write a letter to an editor regarding an article about how a certain type of surgery is great for alleviating neck pain. And your response might be, one of the things that you have to realize is that the placebo group or the comparison group turned out just as well. And that acupuncture might be an alternative, or manipulation might be an alternative, or these supplements are an alternative to pain. And then you present the evidence. So letters to the editor really coming from, you know, really rising up from just being an opinion piece or, you know, kind of gossip. When I was going through graduate school, we'd read the letters in science and that kind of stuff because it would almost be like reading the gossip pages or Ian Landers or something. And you'd recognize certain people's names. They're always having an opinion about something. But that's really what a lot of them were, are opinions. In the medical journals, you'll find that they're very evidence-based, and that's a requirement. Would you like to say anything about letters to the editor?
Just that I think it's a good way for busy faculty members to get involved in scholarship and in a meaningful way, and we're getting more and more. It seems to come in waves where we get hit with certain topics like stroke issue or whatever that reach medical journals, and you wonder how in the world these things get published, and it's a way that we can respond to them. So I think if we have many people doing it, then we could, I think then they know if the editors of the journals would then know if we publish something like this, we're going to hear about it from in a very you know, high-level way, and so we can't just be accepting all of it.
Right.
I think it's, and they're searchable, as you said, and so I think it's a good way to have an impact for a busy clinician.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts about letters to the editor? I think it's Palmer. Last March, we did an abstract workshop on teaching evidence-based practice, and I think it was Palmer who had a course that the result was a letter to the editor. And what the professors found is that the students looked at the letter to the editor as they applied practical use of critical appraisal. So I can read a paper, I can critically appraise it, I can decide whether to apply it or not. But when I want to communicate the importance or what I felt about this article, what my analysis showed, it was very practical to write a letter to the editor in response to a recent article that they might have critically appraised or presented in a journal club, and a way to get published, but requiring still the skills of evidence-based practice.
I have a question. It seems like the literature that really has an agenda, obviously it's been published by that editor, is it difficult to get them to accept your, you know what I'm saying?
Not.
Okay.
They're being, I thought the same thing for this one that Barbara put up there. Dean Smith from Miami contacted me, and he was upset about a paper, and it's in this new online neurology journal that seemed biased, and so we wrote it, and I really didn't know if it would be published or not. And the title, you know, when we get into, you know, a course on this or something, the title becomes important because that's the searchable part. And he even suggested, and I said, you know, we just don't want them to read the abstract. So Dean said, let's put that in the title. Don't just read the abstract. And the editor accepted it. So I'm surprised that they are accepting them. And when you were talking about Beth, I was going to mention there, it seems like a lot of editors and a lot of people are they're hungry to hear about CAM right now.
Yeah.
They want And like the best bets table, they you contacted them, they want us to submit.
Yes.
So I think a lot of them are, the timing's good for these.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, with the best bets, one of the things that they said is that's a huge hole. Because they started with emergency medicine, of course, went into orthopedics, but they have very little on CAM. And a lot of their patients are actually using CAM. So they need to know if is there going to be any conflict. If they're using ginkgo, what's the effect on blood pressure? Or if they're using cinnamon as, for inflammation, can they, what are the effects of it? Is it, how much does it affect inflammation or pain, or is it going to have any impact? So those are some of the topics that they brought up, and they said, probably the majority of their patients are using CAM, and they know nothing about it. They have no idea how it's going to affect what they're doing, or if they can intensify what the patient is doing, or support it in some way, because they don't really know anything about it. So they really encourage that from our institution on this topic. All right, we can take a quick break. Dr. Giles will be talking next, and we're going to get into the technicalities of the whole strategic development and the